I have a story for you. The moral of the story is about perseverance. At least that's the moral that I'm singling out in this story. I think there could be more than one moral to it. Persevere means to persist in an idea, purpose, or task despite obstacles. Some time ago, I purchased a North American Arms 22 Magnum mini revolver. It's the same one that's shown in another one of my videos. I learned that I could obtain a second cylinder for it, a conversion cylinder that would allow me to use 22 long rifle ammunition. I liked that idea. That way I could practice with the cheaper and seemingly more available 22 long rifle ammo instead of 22 Magnum. To get the conversion cylinder, I had to ship my gun back to the manufacturer. They needed to time it or something in order to give me the conversion cylinder. If I didn't ship it to them, I could not get the cylinder. I chose to try to find a gun dealer to ship it through because I didn't want to spend 3 times that cost to ship it myself. And not to spoil the story, but I think that could be one of the other morals to this story. That if you can do it yourself, that's probably the better option. In hindsight, I would have saved myself some misery if I had just shipped it myself, even if it cost me more money. It would have cost me more, but saved me some misery. My first stop was Gun Shop A, as I will call it. There will be Gun Shop A, Gun Shop B, C, and D in this story. Gun Shop A was my go-to gun shop. I had purchased a pistol there about a month prior, and my family in general has spent a lot at this gun shop. I cannot count the number of visits to this shop for ammunition purchases, holsters, belts, rifles, handguns, etc. This time I went there to see if they could ship my revolver back to the factory. I walked in. The man at the counter greeted me by my first name because I had been there often enough. I explained my situation and what I was seeking. Could they ship my gun back to the manufacturer? His answer was no, because they were too busy. I took this answer badly. They were not too busy to sell guns to me or my family in the past. They were not too busy to remember my first name as a feigned expression of customer service. I say feigned customer service because they're being too busy to ship my gun showed me there was no customer service. I was not looking for a free service. Charge me what you think your time is worth. There was no offer of something like, I'm really busy right now, but I can ship it in a month. Also, on their business card, among other things, it says they do special orders. I suppose they need new business cards with updated information stating they are too busy to do special orders. In any case, I took it badly. I felt as if being a repeat customer meant absolutely nothing. I wish the man that owns the gun shop a happy life, but as for me, I've decided I'm too busy to be their customer ever again. I'm too busy to be their customer ever again, but I will have enough time to go out of my way to make purchases at other gun shops. Next, I went to Gun Shop B. They are not really a gun shop. It is a store that has a gun counter or a gun department. I had purchased 2 handguns from them in the past 2 years, not to mention other purchases, including my North American Arms revolver that I was looking to ship. I walked in and there was a man behind the counter. I explained my situation and could they ship my revolver for me. He said he wasn't sure, but to ask his manager when he's in. Okay, that's fine. A few days after this interaction, I happened to be in the area of this store again, so I stopped in to ask the manager if they could ship my gun for me. I made my way through the store to the gun counter. A different guy was behind the counter, helping a couple customers, so I patiently waited my turn. All I was going to ask him was to see his manager so I could find out about shipping my gun. Some time passed and one of the customers he was helping told him to attend to me. Already I could sense this gun counter employee had an attitude. However, I tried setting my observation aside because all I wanted was to talk to the manager, as suggested by the gun counter man I had spoken to a few days earlier. So this employee comes over to me. I asked him for his manager. He gives me attitude right off the bat. I told him I'm not looking to complain to his manager or anything. I explained how the other gun counter employee I spoke to a few days before had told me to ask the manager about a question he himself couldn't give me an answer to. At this employee does not get his manager but asks me what my original question was. So I naively told him about my situation and asked him about shipping my gun. In hindsight, I should have just bypassed him and directed my question to the manager, which I came in the store to do in the first place. Anyway, this employee and his bad attitude reminded me of his attitude stunk big time. I did not come in the store looking for a problem. His answer to my question was no, they would not ship my gun. Again, I took this badly. Apparently, a repeat customer, myself, meant nothing. On top of that, I bought the revolver from them. I thought that might mean something. It did not. On top of that, there is a sign stuck to the door behind their counter that proclaims, "We welcome special orders." On top of that, this kid's attitude was really bad and unnecessarily so. A day or so later, I went to Gun Shop B again. This time I went to complain to the manager, to complain about this employee's bad attitude. The manager listened to me. I told her the employee's name. She said he has had problems before, not with customers, but with fellow employees. She said she would talk to him. I didn't and don't have a problem with any of their employees except this one at the gun counter. This manager did answer my gun shipping question, and no, they couldn't ship it. Her no answer was okay to me. Not ideal, but it was okay. That's all I wanted to know, even though I think they should take down their "We welcome special orders" sign, and I think they could change their store policy so as to make more money by servicing people who want to ship their gun. At this point, my gun shop options were slim in the area where I live, but next I went to Gun Shop C, a little further from home. I had never been there before. I told them about my situation and could they ship my gun for me. The guy I talked to said yes, like it wasn't a problem. It cost me $45 to ship it through them. After what I had been through with gun shops A and B, which I had actually done business with in the past, I was very impressed with how I was treated at Gun Shop C, which I had never given a penny to. They were nice, as if they cared if you came back, as if your mere presence in their store and asking them a question was not a personal offense. What is that? Could it actually be customer service? Anyway, I gave them my revolver and they shipped it for me. After about a month and not hearing from them, I called them to ask about the status of my revolver. It turned out that it had come back from the factory and had been sitting in their gun shop, but they were unable to contact me because they forgot to get my telephone number. It was a hiccup on their end, but at this point I wasn't even bothered by that. At this point, this mistake was like nothing to me. I was still just happy. They were nice to deal with and had shipped my gun for me. So I went to pick it up, as well as the conversion cylinder. Now I thought my ordeal was over, but when I got my revolver home, I took a little closer look at it. Something was different and it wasn't good. The hammer was twice as hard to cock as it was before. The hammer was stiff before, but I could tolerate it. Now it was so stiff I couldn't even cock it all the way back with one thumb. I was so disappointed to have gone through all that just to get a conversion cylinder, and now I have a gun that is worse than before. I truly could not pull the hammer all the way back with one hand, but I could do that before. I pored over the invoice that came back with my gun and saw that they had replaced the mainspring. I wondered why they did that. I had not even put 50 rounds through my gun. I thought the spring couldn't possibly have been worn or weakened, and that is why they replaced it. I was so displeased with how stiff the hammer was, and I didn't understand why they changed it. Who knows, maybe some lawyer gave them the bright idea to install stiffer mainsprings on all the firearms that leave their factory because it is safer. That's cool in theory, but it was just too stiff, and it wasn't like that before. And then I wondered if I was just imagining that the hammer was too stiff. I asked my dad to try it for himself. He thought it was crazy stiff. I asked a gun friend I have to try it. They thought it was too stiff. Okay, so I felt like I wasn't imagining it. I was really disappointed. I started to think it was dumb of me to have even wanted a conversion cylinder. I was so bummed out. I contacted North American Arms to ask about the mainspring. They told me it is their standard procedure to replace the mainsprings on all their repairs. Odd, I thought, as I personally didn't categorize getting a conversion cylinder as a repair. Anyway, they said I could lighten up the spring by removing the cylinder and dry firing it for a bit. Or they could send me a modified mainspring that would be lighter, and I could install it myself. I thought to myself, there's no way I'm going to spend my time sitting around dry firing a gun with an overly stiff spring, hoping at some point that it will reach the tension that I am happy with. Who knows how long that would take, if it would ever get to a tension I would be happy with. I have a feeling that if I dry fired it for that long, it would be my thumb that developed new muscles to cope with the heavy spring, rather than the spring wearing down and getting lighter. So I went with having them send me a modified mainspring. They said I could install it myself, and I'm good at making things and creating things, but I did not feel confident in opening up my revolver and replacing a part. I have done nothing like that before, and I didn't want to mess anything up, so I took it to Gun Shop D. So far in the story, I have been to Gun Shop A, Gun Shop B, C, and now I am at Gun Shop D. I walked in the shop, explained my situation to the guy at the counter, and asked if they could fix it for me, and I gave them the modified mainspring I received from the factory. The guy at the counter held my revolver and tried cocking the hammer. He did so with difficulty and agreed that it was too stiff. He said it couldn't get much worse. I did not need validation at that point, but it was validating to me that he thought so. He quoted me $45 to fix it. That was fine, I thought. I just wanted my revolver usable for me again. Before picking up my revolver from Gun Shop D, this problem of an overly stiff hammer got me thinking. I wanted to try the hammer on a friend's revolver. I wanted to see what it felt like compared to mine, so I did try it. It was a larger revolver, not like my mini revolver, and I found that the hammer was easy to cock. It was fluid, and I did not struggle at all. There can probably be debates about how safe it is to have a stiff hammer versus an easy one, but at this point in my life, I want an easy one. I hope it never happens, but if I ever had to use my mini revolver in self-defense, I don't want to be depending on the adrenaline coursing through my body to power extra strength to my finger to pull the hammer back. I want to be able to cock the gun fairly easily. So back to Gun Shop D. A day later, he called and told me my revolver was ready and I could come pick it up. Prior to going to the store, my dad suggested I ask the guy at the gun shop if I could cock the gun and leave it cocked for a while, and would that lighten the spring? Okay, I made note of that. It seemed like a reasonable question to me. So I went to Gun Shop D. I walked in the store and the guy gave me my revolver to try cocking it and see how it felt. It was better. In fact, it felt exactly like it did when I bought the gun. It was stiff, but it was tolerable, and I could pull the hammer back with one thumb. He said it's going to be $65. Okay, he said $45 before, but I didn't say a thing about it. All I wanted was all of this to be over with, and for me to live happily ever after with my revolver. The guy started telling me that if it was his revolver, he would do some further things to it to make it easier to cock, such as making notches in the mainspring. I thought to myself, if I wanted to lighten the mainspring further, personally I wouldn't make notches in it. I would do something like grind it down or file it down, something more even than notches. However, I am no gun professional. I listened to him talk. It seemed to me he was saying he would further change the mainspring to make it just right if it were his gun, but as for what the gun shop was comfortable in doing for a customer, they were only comfortable in replacing the mainspring with the one that came modified from the factory. That is what I sensed from what he was saying, and I can understand that. At this point, I remembered about the question my dad had told me to ask about leaving the gun cocked for a while and would that lighten the spring. So I began asking that question. I said, if I cock the gun, and then the gun shop guy cut me off. I didn't finish my sentence or my question because he cut me off after I said, if I cock the gun. That's as far as I got with my question before he went off on some tangent about, no, I wouldn't do that. This is a single action revolver, not a double action revolver. You wouldn't want to do that. And I don't remember what else he went on to babble about because he was going in a totally different direction than I had started to. I thought to myself, just let him talk. So I patiently waited as he educated me on my firearm. About how it was a single action revolver and not a double action revolver, and how you wouldn't want to carry the gun around with the hammer cocked. Apparently he thought I was going to ask if I could cock the gun and carry it around that way. I am female, as I'm sure he made a mental note of as he educated me about my gun, but I'm not that dumb. Even if my revolver was double action, I wouldn't want to carry the gun around with the hammer cocked. I didn't understand his logic about how the revolver being single action or double action made any difference in not wanting to carry the gun around with the hammer cocked. Maybe he is smarter than I am and I just couldn't grasp the intelligent things he was trying to tell me. After he was done educating me on my firearm, I resumed my question and edited it to soothe his safety concerns. I said, if I cock the gun and have it unloaded at home and leave it that way for a while, could that lighten the spring? He thought that yes, that could possibly lighten the spring, and using the gun could lighten the spring. Okay, thank you. I paid him and left. Looking back, if I had been in a different sort of mood, as soon as he cut me off, I could have cut him off and asked him to please let me finish my question. Or after he educated me on how my gun is single action and not double action, I could have had some smart response like, thank you for informing me about that. I really had no idea my gun was single action, even though I've used it before and I knew that about my gun before I bought it. However, then I would be lying. I obviously do have an idea that my gun is single action. But that happens to me sometimes. I look back on some social encounter, and after I have time to think about it, I can come up with something more clever to say. But in the moment, that ability is not always there. In that moment, like I said, I just wanted it all to be over and to get in and out of the store as quickly and easily as I could. At this point in the story, I should have been happy, as the hammer on my revolver felt like it did before. I could cock it with one hand, but now that I knew it was possible to do my own modifications to the mainspring, and now that I knew how the stiffness of other hammers on other revolvers feel, I wanted to get my gun just right for me. Also, if that guy at Gun Shop D can put a mainspring in my gun, I ought to be intelligent enough to do it too. Somehow, the way he spoke to me, educating me on not to carry around a cocked revolver, gave me confidence that if he is able to work on my gun, I sure ought to be able to. With the help of my dad, I worked on the mainspring that was initially too stiff to get it lighter for me. I didn't want to mess with the mainspring that was installed by Gun Shop D, the one that came modified from the factory and was tolerable for me to use. The stiff mainspring that was taken out was now an extra, and I thought it safe to mess with that one, trying to get its tension just how I wanted it to be. And here's some footage of that. First, I thought I had to open up the revolver to access the mainspring. To do that, it was obvious this screw needed to be undone. One piece of information that's good to know is that this screw has reverse threads. I took the revolver apart, but I saw that this was unnecessary. To access the mainspring, I only needed to take the grips off, and I could remove and replace the mainspring from there. Putting the revolver back together was a pain, to say the least. 3 times I almost lost this tiny handspring, as when I would try to put it back together, it would be under tension, and then I would shift things and suddenly it would go flying. At one point, I was thrilled that I actually put it all back together, but when I put the cylinder in and tried to cock it, the cylinder did not rotate at all. I wondered, what on earth is the problem now? So I took it all apart again to inspect what I did wrong. It turned out this tiny index spring was missing. I didn't even know it was missing when I had put it back together. I looked for it everywhere on the countertop I was working on, and I couldn't find it. Then I started crawling on the floor on my hands and knees looking for it. The frustration was building, and I almost thought I would cry if I couldn't find it, but about 15 feet away from where I was working, I found it on a carpet. I put it back in my revolver and reassembled it with difficulty. Now it worked properly. The cylinder was rotating fine. That super tiny spring is important. As far as modifying the mainspring goes, I had my dad narrow it down. After it was ground down and narrowed, we put it in the gun to feel its tension when the hammer was cocked. It was still too stiff, so it was narrowed down a little more and put in the gun again to test how its tension felt. This was repeated until it felt just right to me. It felt great. At this point, I thought all was well, but when I went to test fire it, this is what happened. Nothing happened. the rounds were not being hit with enough force to make them fire. None of the 5 rounds went off. This was an anticlimax, to say the least, but it was interesting at the same time. I inspected the rims on the rounds, and it had definitely made a dent in them. I was surprised they didn't go off. I tried a different brand of .22 long rifle ammo, and it fired 3 out of 5 rounds. By this, I learned that it was close. The tension in the mainspring was not enough, but it was close. The mainspring had been ground down a bit too much. At this point, I felt like throwing in the towel, so to speak, and just reinstall the modified mainspring that came from the factory, the one that Gun Shop D installed, and just live with it. It was tolerable, after all, and maybe I should just forget about modifying anything and possibly getting the hammer tension even better for me. But after I got over that disappointing anticlimax of the gun not firing consistently with that mainspring we worked on, I had enough interest to keep trying. My next step was to order 3 mainsprings from North American Arms. I wanted a few, so I would have a few to work with, as I aimed at getting the tension just right for me. If one was ground down too much again, I would have some spares to try again with. Again, I had my dad narrow one of the mainsprings. This time, we got the tension just right. Not too much was ground off. Cocking the hammer felt good to me. It was easier than the modified mainspring from the factory, but had enough tension to make the gun consistently fire. We did it. I'm so glad it's over. I'm very happy with my revolver now. I can now live happily ever after with my revolver. It was an ordeal to go through all that, but now my gun functions for me personally better than it ever did before. Throughout this months-long ordeal, there were definitely times where I was disappointed. Like when I was so discouraged I thought it was dumb of me to have even wanted to get a conversion cylinder. Like if I had never wanted it, I wouldn't have had to go through this unpleasant process. Or as the costs of things added up, I imagined that if I had paid a bit more, I could have bought a whole other mini revolver that is already set to shoot .22 long rifle. But at that point, I was too far in to go back. I was committed to seeing it through to the end, even if the numbers didn't make a lot of sense. Or like when I took my revolver to Gun Shop D to get the mainspring replaced with the modified lighter one, my gun friend wondered why I did that, as they could have done it for me, they said. They seemed slightly bothered about that, and it didn't make me feel good, honestly. I felt like maybe I did the wrong thing in bringing it to a gunsmith over giving it to my friend to fix. Or other doubts I had, like, am I even going to use the conversion cylinder very much? It's funny, but there were a lot of little physical and psychological obstacles to overcome in this process, and all because I wanted a conversion cylinder. It was a simple thing for me to want, but it turned into more than I expected. The moral of the story is about perseverance and how that's a good and a necessary quality to have in life. Again, persevere means to persist in an idea, purpose, or task despite obstacles. I'm going to talk about the quality of perseverance in relation to the Christian life. So if the Christian life is not your thing, this is a heads up that that's the direction I'm going now. Perseverance is necessary to live this Christian life, to run this race. Perseverance is necessary. There are a lot of obstacles to overcome. Like in my story, in the Christian life, there can be disappointments, personal doubts about your choices, friends wondering why you made certain choices, thoughts about throwing in the towel, thoughts about having put a lot on the line in your faith, and is the cost you're paying worth it? But then I have thought I'm too far in to go back now, and I don't want to go back. I know it's worth it. I'm committed to seeing this through to the end. You can persist through to the end, despite all the obstacles, with, first of all, God helping you, and with the quality of perseverance. During the discouraging or disappointing times in my pursuit of a conversion cylinder, it helped to remember what was at the end. In the end, I would have a second cylinder, I could use .22 long rifle ammo with it, and I would have fun practicing with it. To keep that good end in view helped me to keep persisting. Likewise, I think it is helpful for us Christians to remember what is at the end for us. Keep that in view to help you persevere. May this quality of perseverance be in each of God's people. You know, an amount of perseverance is in faith. To persevere in belief when circumstances or human reasoning or other things would push against belief. Perseverance in belief pushes back and pushes through. This is important. Sometimes it is harder to persevere than at other times, but as Christians, may we persevere and keep following and focusing on our Lord.